Good morning. So today I'm going to answer what is exposure response prevention, known as ERP, and also how do you do it? A lot of us are familiar with what it is, but then are having trouble creating the exposures for ourselves. So exposure response prevention is a technique, the most well-known and most effective technique at treating OCD, which is essentially where you acknowledge the intrusive thoughts, you're aware of them, but you don't follow what they're saying. You don't give in to the compulsions or whatever it is they're saying to do. Essentially, you do the opposite, and you do something that is going to be good for your well-being. So for example, if you have a compulsion to constantly check if your door is locked, right? So you leave the house, you lock the door, but your mind convinces you that you need to go back 3 or 4 times to recheck if the door is locked. And you experience this as intrusive thoughts. You're getting an intrusive thought, go check if the door is locked. Maybe at first you say, no, I think I just locked it. And the thought comes back, well, what if you didn't? Someone could break in. It's not worth it to be unsure. Better that you just go check, right? And so that is the compulsion kicking in. Now you're probably feeling, you're feeling fear, you're feeling anxiety, and you're looking for relief from that anxiety. And so you decide to go back and shut the door, right? That's giving into the compulsion. That may lower your anxiety in the moment, but overall you've strengthened the loop because your mind knows that it makes sense to feed you these intrusive thoughts because you followed them, you paid attention to them, and you listened to them. That's why right after you shut the door, when you feel that immediate relief, a few moments later you get another thought saying, well, did I really check? Maybe I never went back at all. Maybe I went back, but I didn't actually lock the door, right? This happened because you just listened to the intrusive thought. So your mind sees this as something positive. It thinks, wow, I fed this person a thought that was useful. I'm going to feed them more, right? And because you just created that pattern where you lowered your anxiety, you now know you have that option to do it again. And so that's how we get stuck in this cycle. So essentially, to do the exposure, you would do the opposite of what the thoughts are saying. In this example, you would do everything possible to not go back and check the door, right? And when this happens, your mind's going to be screaming at you sometimes, telling you really need to go back. What are you doing? You're making a mistake, whatever it is. And you just stay calm, you stay firm, you allow those thoughts to be there without giving in to them. Right? So the thoughts are there. We're not saying that the thoughts are going to go away in the beginning. They're still going to be there, but you just resist them. You can take some deep breaths. You can put your focus on something moving forward. So instead of going back to check the door, you put your focus on what are you doing next, right? Are you going to work? Are you going to the store? You can put your attention on your car. Maybe you have to walk to your car. Whatever you have to do to not give in to that compulsion. Of course, it's also important that you manage your emotions at that time, right? So that's where the deep breathing comes in. You want to do your best to lower your anxiety level without giving into the compulsion. If you find that these intrusive thoughts are really strong and you feel like you are going to eventually give into the compulsion, then at least you can delay it, right? So you can set a 5-minute timer, for example, and you can say, all right, for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to do something else. I'm not going to give into the compulsion. And even if you eventually give into the compulsion, maybe you've lasted 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes without giving in. And what this does is it gives a pause between the intrusive thought and the compulsion. That makes it less compulsive overall. It's less about immediately reacting and more about pausing and taking time to reflect. If you get to the end of the 5-minute timer without giving into your compulsion, you can reset the timer, right? Sometimes I've done this when I had really bad OCD years ago. Sometimes I kept resetting timers for 45 minutes, an hour. And then when you get to an hour past the intrusive thought, sometimes you just get bored. You just get almost lazy. That's how it was for me. I'd be really anxious. I'd really want to give into a compulsion, but I was almost just lazy after time passed. I just didn't feel like doing the entire ritual, especially when the ritual was more involved, right? Something I like to do as well is if the intrusive thought comes in the middle of some sort of activity, like maybe you're cleaning dishes and you have the intrusive thought, try your best to just continue cleaning dishes for at least a few minutes because oftentimes your mind will actually become distracted to the point where you forget about your intrusive thought, right? So do your best to allow that to happen. Our minds do not have a lot of focus at times, and so sometimes that works as well. Now, for some of you who have pure OCD or have OCD where it's not physical compulsions, it's more mental compulsions, I've noticed a lot of confusion with this type of OCD when it comes to exposures, right? So for example, some people have fears of getting sick and ending up in the hospital. That's their OCD fear. And so I've got the question, well, I can't do an exposure because I can't put myself in the hospital, right? And so this is not what we mean by exposures. You don't have to expose yourself to the actual problem or event. Instead, you want to expose yourself to the thoughts about it, right? So in this case, if you have a fear of ending up in the hospital, your exposure is to your thoughts about the hospital, right? So when the thought naturally arises, you don't have to create the thought on purpose, right? Some practitioners will have you do this. I don't necessarily feel this is helpful, right? The intrusive thoughts will naturally arise on their own, and so I think it's best to let that happen naturally. So when this intrusive thought arises about the hospital, right, you just allow it to be there without giving into a mental compulsion, right? So some people, when they think that thought, they have to rush to reassure themselves. They have to rush into reassurance, or they have to rush to argue with that thought. So that's a mental compulsion. So we don't want to go into that mental compulsion at all. We want instead to allow the intrusive thought to be there without reacting. So the first step is to label it, right? So you say, okay, this is my OCD theme. This is an intrusive thought. Of course I'm feeling distressed now because this is a scary thought. And if I'm believing this thought, of course I'm going to feel anxiety. And so I recognize that and I say, okay, this is the pattern. Whenever I have this intrusive thought, I experience anxiety. Just because you feel anxious or feel a distressing emotion doesn't mean that something bad is happening, right? So you can feel scared without there being actual danger. There's an example when if you're walking in a field and you see something that looks like a snake, you feel terrified, right? Fear is now rushing through your body. But as you get closer to the snake, you actually realize it's just a rope, right? And so when you realize it's a rope, all the fear dissipates. However, before you realized it was a rope, you had fear rushing through your body. You were in fight or flight. You were panicking. Yet it was only just a rope and not a snake. And so OCD is the same way. You are having fear, chemicals and sensations rushing through your body that feel real, but you're reacting to a rope instead of a snake. You're reacting to something that isn't real, right? So this is what we want to recognize. There's another great analogy that OCD thoughts are like a faulty alarm system. An alarm that, say a fire alarm where you're cooking eggs, there's no danger, there's no fire, and yet anytime you cook, this fire alarm just goes off for no reason, right? And since you recognize that, it goes off every time and there's no danger, you learn to ignore it until you can get it fixed, right? You don't panic because you hear this alarm when all you're doing is cooking eggs after this has happened 12 times in a row, right? And so we want you to be able to make these connections and recognize the patterns when it comes to your intrusive thoughts, especially if your intrusive thoughts are the same day after day after day after day, right? You want to recognize, oh, this is just a pattern. I always get scared and it's always fine, right? Or there may be a few times when maybe it wasn't fine to you, but you're still engaging in a pattern that isn't helpful. And this is what we want to recognize. So you absolutely can create your own exposures on your own, right? And treat your OCD that way. But I find that in the beginning, it's best to work with someone who specializes in this, someone who can make those corrections as you go along so that you don't spend time either doing exposures that are really not the ones you want to be doing, or choosing the right exposures, but then not carrying them out the way they're meant to be done, because this can also be counterproductive as well. And I have a lot of examples of this that I will share later on. But if you found this video helpful, if you are ready to finally treat your OCD, I recommend doing it as soon as possible. These are neural pathways that you're deepening, behavioral loops that you're deepening in your mind, right? And so the deeper these grooves get set, the harder it is to break out of them. No matter how long you've had these patterns, you always can break out of them. But it just is a lot easier to work with it. The sooner, the better. No matter how long it's been, you can always treat your OCD, but the sooner you treat it, the easier it'll be, because these patterns have not formed as strongly as they will have if you wait longer. So I highly recommend you join either my group coaching program that starts November 1st or my private sessions. The group program, we meet 4 times a week for 4 weeks, so that's a total of 16 sessions. It's so involved, so comprehensive. You learn all the tools you need with a great community for a really affordable price. And then if you want that individual time, you can sign up for for a private session where we will work one-on-one and we will make a game plan, a practical step-by-step guide of what you need to be practicing daily to recover from OCD. So please subscribe to my channel, message me if you want to get more help, and yeah, you can do this.